You have to be able to understand what the reality is of the messaging and the things that are being sent to you. Now, for somebody who's brand new, it means they have to build a foundational knowledge first. That's the key to being able to understand whether a term is a marketing term or whether it is a true kind of philosophical approach to how we do something in security. But I think you need to gain some foundational knowledge, some foundational experience to be able to get to that point. And like I said, I've been around this industry since almost the beginning of it, pretty close to the beginning of it. And so I've gotten to see the various waves of things that happen and the way messaging plays out and whatnot. And so that's really what drives my kind of hot take on this.
Welcome to the Elephant in AppSec, the podcast to explore, challenge, and boldly face the AppSec elephants in the room. I'm Alexandra, your host, joined by my amazing co-host Tristan, a former security engineer and co-founder of Escape. Today, we have an amazing guest, Chris Romeo, joining us. Chris has 26 years of experience in cybersecurity, having worked for 11 years at CISCO, founded his own security education company, Security Journey, and now Devici, an AI-infused collaborative threat modeling tool. Chris is a sought-after speaker at numerous global application security conferences. He is also the author of a weekly newsletter, The Reasonable AppSec, where he shares the top 5 security articles worth your time. Chris hosts not one, but 3 security podcasts. The Threat Modeling Podcast, The Security Table, and my personal favorite, the Application Security Podcast. I appreciate how he freely expresses his opinions, sometimes quite strong ones, like the DAST stat, a topic he has recently discussed with James Bertotti. I was very eager to discuss his opinion with him. We also talked whether shift left is just a marketing term, how AppSec professionals should first educate themselves to understand all the tools and messaging thrown at them, and shared some threat modeling stories. Dive right in. Chris, I'm very excited to have you on a podcast today. So you're also a podcast host, so we can maybe exchange also some good best practices, and also at a little bit at the end. So for our technical audience, we can start, from the technical topic at the beginning. You've been, in the security for more than 20 years. I've seen it's at the end of 80s when you started, and you worked for
end of the 90s. Don't put me in the 80s. Don't put me at work in the 80s, because that would mean I'm a lot older than I look. But yes, I started in technology in 1997. So I got started in a cybersecurity role. So I've been in cybersecurity for 26 years.
That's everywhere. So that's very nice. And the podcast, and on the podcast, I love to ask controversial questions. So that's great. And I think when I joined security quite recently, because I came from the mechanical engineering background and slowly transitioned into marketing. So there is so much terminology, to be honest, and to learn, and also to see whether it's not useful for me to apply. And I came across, I think one of the first things is the shift left concept, which was kind of everywhere, and opinions really, varied on this topic. And I think you have a strong opinion on this one. So it's kind of, I think you mentioned it's time to stop, shifting left. So it's very direct. And I think why do you think it's actually the time to stop? And what are the specific, drawbacks that you see?
And that challenge that I have is this whole idea of shifting left has just become a marketing term. It doesn't actually mean it's being used in such a way. And there's a vendor out there whose tagline is shift everywhere. Wait, hold on. If I was shifting left, so in the early days, people told me I needed to shift left, and then the runtime folks told me that we needed to shift right.
Yeah.
And then people told us we needed to start left, and then we needed to start right, and now we have to shift everywhere. And so it's just, my challenge is that this has just become mumbo jumbo. It doesn't actually mean anything anymore. Because the funny way I like to think about it is, if I'm going to shift everywhere includes nowhere. And so now I'm shifting nowhere. So I've gone from shifting left to shifting right to starting left to starting right to shifting everywhere, shifting nowhere. It doesn't actually mean anything anymore. It's become a marketing term, and that's the challenge that I have.
And do you think that shift everywhere is actually linked to maybe
this specific vendor, I don't know who it is, but that they tried kind of to approach the problem of the tool, tool sprawl, and kind of try to show, okay, they can do it for the whole, software development life cycle. Do you think it might be related to that?
No, I think it's a marketing play to grasp or try to grab onto a particular term and manipulate it a little bit to try to create a spin on it or something. But and listen, I'm not someone who dislikes marketing. I think marketing is a crucial part of every business. Marketing is a core piece. If we don't market, we can't find people and make people aware of what we build and what we provide as a solution. They can't buy it and we go out of business. So yeah. I'm not against marketing. I think marketing is a crucial part of running a business. But I just think we just need to put this shifting idea behind us and stop using it as a marketing term and yes, we need to embrace the concepts of building security and privacy in from the beginning. That's always going to be the best way to do it. But we just need to push this kind of usage as a marketing term away and move on to something else. Come up with something better. Come up with something original.
What do you think if someone just starts in the security? Let's say they don't have years of experience and they try to understand, okay, what's good for me, or what are actually, best practices in the security and what are just marketing words or buzzwords, let's say. How should they differentiate, between this actually good advice and what they should follow and this marketing buzzwords?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's always a challenge. There's always some challenges in trying to, and it's something that applies to people that are new. It also applies to people that are just trying to choose a product to purchase when they have multiple options, right? You have to be able to understand what the reality is of the messaging and the things that are being sent to you. Now, for somebody who's brand new, it means they have to build a foundational knowledge first. That's the key to being able to understand whether a term is a marketing term or whether it is a true kind of philosophical approach to how we do something in security. But I think you need to gain some foundational knowledge, some foundational experience to be able to get to that point. And like I said, I've been around this industry since almost the beginning of it, pretty close to the beginning of it. And so I've gotten to see the various waves of things that happen and the way messaging plays out and whatnot. And so that's really what drives my kind of hot take on this.
What ways did you...
I mean, when I think about the various introductions of, types of tools, for example, like if we go back now, and I've only been in AppSec. I got into AppSec around 2010, 2011. Okay. So I wasn't early in AppSec. AppSec kind of, if we think about when it started, we could say OWASP started in 2003, I think, officially on the books. And so I was a little bit of a later, I was still, I wasn't super late, but I wasn't at the beginning of the AppSec party, right? I was focused on other areas of cybersecurity. But I just think about when you have an introduction of a new class of technology, for example, that's kind of a wave that happens. Think, for example, and we're going to go way back, but when SIM technologies came out, kind of has a parallel to AppSec. I mean, you can send AppSec results into a SIM solution. We're starting to see ASPM, posture management tools that are providing kind of that SIM-like thing. But I remember the days when we didn't have a SIM because it didn't exist as a technology. So that's an example of a wave where a class of technology driven by a collection of vendors came onto the market and changed how we did security. I was doing managed security at Exodus Communications back in the late 90s, and we were deploying some of the first managed IDSs. Yes. Intrusion detection systems. This is how old this technology is, but also firewalls. We were deploying firewalls from a managed security perspective. We did not have any way to centralize the logging collection of these things. So the logs would come in and get written to text files. And but then you had I think about the introduction of a class of technology like SIM, and now all of a sudden we had a wave across the market because there was an opportunity to be able to point those tools, those IDSs, those firewalls into a central place where we, doing incident response, we could have a central place to look at logs. And now you look at that market, for example, and this, Splunk was acquired just in the last year. Like that's a big time market. That's a multi-billion-dollar market now that was a wave in technology. And you think about like what happened in AppSec. I mean, there was a day not too long ago when software composition analysis tools didn't exist. They weren't here. They weren't part of now it's like, if you don't have an SCA tool, if I'm looking at your AppSec program and you're like, we don't do anything to scan our open source challenges. I'm like, whoa, you need to, like, it's so easy to get something that you can.
Does it happen often?
No, I would say I don't really see. Yeah. I mean, most people that I'm talking to and looking at what they're doing from an AppSec perspective, they have some type, because you have open source options, you have, various tools from OWASP that you can use. There are software composition analysis like tools built into the various, like NPM, Node Package Manager, has an audit keyword that I can use to audit my to see what dependencies may be out of date, for example. But like I remember when SCA tools came out of the market, like that was a wave. That was a new, software supply chain has really caught fire the last year or two. Yeah. But, SCA and software supply chain has been a problem we've been thinking about starting 5 or 6 years ago. But there's been this big wave in the market as people start to reflect on different problems. And we know software supply chain is one of our top problems right now that we need to solve.
And do you think like all the tools come in waves? It's the same as I think the SaaS tools. They had their own popularity at one point. Yes, too.
Yeah, I think SaaS tools have been around so long that they've come in multiple waves, because there are tools now. There are tools that existed in the early days of SaaS that are not relevant anymore. They still exist. They're still being sold. They're kind of special purpose, I would say, more than they didn't ride the wave of the web well. They didn't come in and they didn't follow along. So like remember when SaaS tools started, was around the time OWASP was starting, maybe even before. They may have been SaaS. They may have had the early SaaS tools may have even been earlier than OWASP, but they were focused on scanning C code, because in 2001, people didn't write code. We had this language called Perl. We didn't have Python. We had Perl. And it's like Python, only harder, is the way I would describe it. Not really, but Perl did not have the ecosystem that Python does today. Like with Python today, you can find a package, you can invent, you can think up, what do I want this thing to do? You go search the packages. Oh, there's a package. Someone already solved that. Perl, you had to write more of your own code. There were some packages, right? But like the early SaaS tools were focused on scanning C code. And so the first wave of innovation with that type of technology was scanning for C vulnerabilities, for buffer overflows and memory, use before freeze and memory allocation problems and stuff. And then the web explodes as the 2000s continue. The web explodes. And now when I think about SaaS tools, like the SaaS tools that I think of as cutting edge right now aren't part of that group that was in the early 2000s. Those tools have kind of been, there's been a second wave of innovation for like those type of SaaS tools. And so I think a lot of our waves, a lot of our innovation as an industry is really driven by vendors solving problems. And I was just talking about this on another podcast too with a guest who was telling me this, but like I'll kind of just share the same thought. Like in the security industry, we often have this anti-vendor approach, like, oh, vendors, they're bad, they're but yet where does innovation come from? Innovation comes from people having an idea and building a company around it. Like SCA, and yes, there was dependency check, there were some earlier things, and we'd have to go look at the timeline to say where did SCA kind of pick up its speed from. But vendors are the ones that are, think about, if we go above and beyond security, we have this thing called large language model now, and everybody's using them for everything. Where did they come from? Did some open source project create them? No, it was OpenAI it was Google, it was Facebook, it was or Meta, it was Apple's now getting into this. Like so the wave of innovation comes as a result of vendors focusing on things, and we can hate on vendors all we want for various reasons, but vendors are what are really driving the innovation and pushing new technologies that make us, like as AppSec people, be able to do our jobs better. Like who's not using a LLM, at least in a test environment or test mode, to try to figure out how can we use this to make ourselves more effective?
I think all the teams are now using LLM and AI, like in general, there,
we have to
day-to-day work. And I've seen you've been, but like speaking about tools, I've seen you've been quite negative about DAST. And then it was like a whole conversation about it. Like, did you change? Like, did some people change your mind actually?
It's tough to change my mind at this point. I've been around so long that. Well, let me just give you my high level view on DAST. And well, I'll tell you a story, okay? Because my dislike of DAST comes from real world experience. Okay. So my previous company, we had a requirement from a vendor, from a procurement team, that said we had to scan our application with DAST. And so I had a call with them and I said, why do we have to scan our application with DAST? Well, you have to check if you have any vulnerabilities. I'm like, the way I built the application, it's very simple. The DAST tool, there's nothing for it to find. Because we were using a container, we were using a RASP tool to protect the request coming into it. And we were also we had simplified that what was in the container was only what needed to be there for the application to run. There was nothing extra, no extra packages, very slimmed down approach to limiting attack surface, right? Which is a big thing. And so they said, oh, well, you have to do a DAST if you want. If you don't do it, if you don't scan your tool or regularly scan your application with DAST, then we won't buy your solution. So great. I'm like, great. I got to go buy a DAST. And so I go look at, this is, 2.5 years ago now, but I look to see who's the best in the market. I do a bunch of free trials with different vendors. None of them can scan our application. They are, but they're providing me with their results are like, you don't have a secure cookie flag on your cookie. It was a consent cookie. It was the GDPR consent cookie. It's not secure. It's a public piece of information that I put up because GDPR says I have to have a consent cookie that says that you're consenting to whatever I'm storing, right? And so I go and I use all these different tools and I'm like, none of these things can scan a modern application that's API driven with a JavaScript front end. Like none of them could provide any value. So I finally found one that at least wasn't such a difficult pain, and I bought a license to it and I set it up to scan once a week, and I never did anything with it again. I just left it running in the background so I could meet that compliance requirement, right? And so that's really where my dislike of DAST, and it's not even a dislike. I mean, the companies that are behind it are great people. I just don't see the return on investment from the tool. If I have a tool that all it does is tell me, like, I'm missing a header for a security header, or I'm missing a cookie, a secure cookie flag on a cookie, things like this, it didn't even get to my application. It couldn't even get into my API backend and explore and figure out what the different API endpoints were.
Okay.
Yeah. So that was that was where I got. That's how I got into kind of not recommending DAST anymore. And so that's where I land, though. Like, I'm not going to recommend something to somebody that I don't think provides them with any value.
Okay. And what would be then the value for you, like providing basically business logic vulnerabilities, let's say, or providing, what kind of information would you actually expect it, from the perfect DAST solution?
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I've had this question asked before. Like, okay, you're so negative about this. What would be the perfect tool that would do it? One, it's got to be fast enough to go in the pipeline. There's not a DAST tool around that can run inside of a pipeline at scale, at speed, without slowing things down. So there's got to, and it's a fundamental problem of how DAST is trying to scan the running version of an application. Yeah. It's challenging to do that with a full big application in in a DevOps pipeline, especially when you only change, like say you have a change to an application, there's a pull request, it's changing one of the API endpoints out of 100. Say it's a monolithic application. It's not microservices. So you're changing one endpoint out of the DAST tools today don't have the technology to drive to that one single change. Because really from that PR, all I care about is scanning the one thing that changed. I don't need to rescan the entire endpoints in the whole application. I need to pinpoint one thing. And I think one of the big challenges is it's almost impossible to stub the rest of the application from a security scanning perspective. Because like from a functional testing perspective, people stub things all the time because you don't want your running functional test to have to connect to some outside API every time you run the test. So you stub it, you make it always return, the stub just returns a standard value every time into the test so the test can continue running. That's what we need from a DAST perspective to allow it to run at speed and at scale, is you need to be able to focus on just what was changed and stub the rest of the application somehow so that you can still get the benefits of scanning a running application. And that's why I think IAST is a big path forward to this. And I love IAST because it uses that same style that RASP uses of being inside the running application. Like IAST is, because it's inside the application, it is not going to say, oh, I saw a SQL injection. It's only going to say it saw a SQL injection if it saw one go by in the request that came into it. And so that's my other thing is, like, for me, what is a perfect DAST? Well, it's something that can run in the pipeline, it can run at speed and scale, it can pinpoint a single change, and it can have it can basically be the technology behind IAST, where it's, instead of looking for a vulnerability by scanning something in the endpoint, it's watching the data pipeline of how things are moving, and it's seeing a vulnerability when it's in the innards of the application.
Interesting. I mean, there are a lot of opportunities of improvement. Maybe in some months or in the years, who knows, you'll have actually your perfect DAST tool.
All I can say is they better send me a t-shirt.
The speed, actually, I think that the industry is changing from month to month and year, like over year, as you said. Some things, like a lot of things, come in waves. So it's just maybe it's also going to be a category on its own, just not going to be called DAST at this point.
And I mean, API security tools are taking the place of what DAST was supposed to do. And so you're seeing this migration to tools that are good at scanning the API endpoints. And now the key is you have to feed them. You have to give them some configuration to help them find the endpoints. I've yet to see a tool, and if it's out there, someone should point it out to me, that is an API scanner that will just hit the API and somehow figure out what all the endpoints are. I mean, I guess you could scan the JavaScript front end, like the React front end. You could pour through all the data and look for, just like DAST was supposed to do in the early days. But I haven't seen anybody doing that approach. But what I'm seeing now is, like, API security scanning tools. You give them a configuration file that tells them, here's the 20 or the 100 endpoints I was talking about before. So then they know where to go. So you're directing them. Now that gives you a little more operational overhead because, oh, we forgot to add the new endpoint to it. We've been scanning for months and there's an endpoint that hasn't been, you get that kind of operational challenge. But I think that's that gets us further along than what we think of, what I'll call classic DAST.
Yeah. I'll send you the article that we just wrote, how Escape works, how this algorithm works. So it might be interesting for you from this standpoint, because I think the depth of the scanning is quite impressive, and that's one of the things that we are working on a lot, as you said. And indeed, sometimes you do need configuration for certain things, but the goal is to remove the configuration as much as possible.
Yeah, makes sense.
So apart from like the tools, you also been quite passionate about threat modeling with the podcast on threat modeling and your own company as well. So how do you think threat modeling like complement actually all this in different security initiatives and like on actually identifying, you know, maybe preventing vulnerabilities from your, like, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so threat modeling is complementary to all of the other tools and things that we've been discussing here. I think of threat modeling as something that I want developers to be doing when they're performing design. And a lot of people will say, oh, well, developers don't design things anymore in a DevOps world. Yes, they do. It may be on a piece of paper. It may be in a notepad on their computer. It may be in their head, but nobody just takes a user story and starts typing, starts coding, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, you read the user story, you think about, okay, what needs to change? Okay, I need to add a new endpoint. That's design.
Yeah.
And that's where threat modeling has its biggest possibilities. Because while you're doing that design, to our idea of building security in and starting things in the beginning, if you can find problems during that design time conversation and review, and you can modify the design, then you don't have to rework. Like, the biggest thing that developers hate the most is rework. There's nothing worse than pushing a feature into production, and then 3 weeks later, somebody says, oh, there's a problem with this. Because now as a developer, you got to take the current feature I'm working on, unload it from your memory and your brain. You got to reload. You got to load the feature you did months or weeks ago into your brain. You got to process it, try to figure out, okay, how do I fix this? Like, rework is a big challenge for many different reasons, right? But what threat modeling can do, though, is it can help you to eliminate that rework, or at least cut it down significantly, because you're finding those security and privacy challenges while you're doing the design of the change you're going to make. So that's really the core value I see.
And do you think kind of the training actually on all of these issues, it's complementary to that? Because when you design, you can also like explain actually, you know, to the developer how things work from the security perspective, right? Because otherwise you're just like scanning the vulnerabilities and then just dumping, you know, the problems on them without actually like explaining. I think it's like actually widespread.
And I'm a giant education fan. I mean, my first company was Security Journey, which we sold.
Do you still run it?
No, we sold that company in 2022 to a private equity firm. But I'm still passionate about education. That's what got me into starting that company. I'm somebody who really believes that the better we equip developers with knowledge about security, AppSec, and just general security principles, secure coding, all of these things, the better we prepare them and teach them, the better decisions they'll make when they're in those design conversations. Because what we've done for decades is we've asked people to be security conscious without ever telling them what that means. We've asked them to go in and, well, you should be considering these requirements. Well, I don't understand what these requirements mean, so how am I supposed to implement them? So education is really the foundational piece that prepares developers to understand what is SQL injection. Oh, okay, I understand what it is. Here's what it looks like. Let me play around with one. And then when I'm writing my own code, I'll know how to at least see it. When I'm looking at something like, oh, wait, that doesn't look right. I'm taking input from the outside and I'm passing that to a query directly. That's a problem. Like, if I don't have that knowledge, how does a developer know? They're not learning in university. That's not part of the university curriculum, unfortunately. I wish it was. And so I think education and threat modeling, though, do really go hand in hand, because threat modeling itself can be an educational experience. Like when I go in to help people at a company start a threat modeling program, one of the first things I do is threat model. Like, let's start doing some threat modeling sessions where I'm facilitating the approach and I'm helping. And a lot of times I'm asking questions. That's I'm letting all of my secrets out here, but that's okay, because I'm amongst friends.
Competitor company.
I always welcome competition. I love it. I love having people to compete against. But really, my general approach, though, is ask lots of questions. Like, so when I'm facilitating a threat modeling session, I probably know the answer to about 50% of the questions that I ask, if I'm lucky. The other 50%, I just ask wild and random questions. What happens if somebody did this to that piece of the thing you're building? And then the developers and the testers and the product managers will sit there for a second and go, I think this would happen. Maybe this would happen. And then their brains start going, I didn't know the answer to the question. Just threw it under the table to get their creative process going, right? Because what you'll find is a developer knows the system 10 times better than I do as a security person. I have to work amongst multiple pieces of the system. I have to understand the entire system and how everything fits together. Developers are focused on one piece of the system and the features that surround it. And so all I'm trying to do in those sessions is unlock their abilities and their creativity to be able to think about what are the security and privacy challenges? How do we capture them? And then how do we fix them? How do we fix them before we get to production? Before we write a bunch of code? Let's design differently so that we write code differently so that when we get to production, everything is as good as we could possibly make it for security and privacy.
And do you have like a concrete example of a win, when you actually went to a company and because, of that threat modeling exercise?
I have a funny one. I have kind of a funny one. So we were in a training class. This is many, many years ago. And this is for a large tech company. And and we're going through a particular section talking about a particular type of vulnerability. And all of a sudden, this developer that gets this look on his face, he's like this. His eyes are big, his mouth's open.
Yeah.
He's like, I gotta go. I'll be back later. And he pushes his chair. This is in the middle of the class. He pushes his chair in and he goes back and he disappears. He just goes out of the room. He wasn't running, but he left the room with some amount of speed. And so we finish the morning. We have lunch is over. Right after lunch, he comes back in and sits back down. And we're like, what happened? Where'd you go? Like, that was abrupt. You just got up and ran out of the room. He's like, the problem we were discussing, I did that in my code last week. And he's like, I want to go. He's like, I had to fix it. He's like, and this is what I call the light bulb moment with threat modeling. So the light bulb moment is when that light bulb goes on over their head, they think differently for the rest of their career as developers, because they've seen this threat could manifest itself in this challenge and problem, and it has to be mitigated in this way. Now, in this gentleman's example, he literally got up and ran out of the classroom to come back hours later, and he had fixed the bug. He had fixed it in his code, and that had generated the right pull requests, and then he came back to class with us. But that's an example of how this light bulb, this threat modeling light bulb works, like this security light bulb. It goes on, and we always expect developers are going to have this knowledge, but nobody's ever taught them this. Like, threat modeling teaches it. Educational programs teach it. Universities don't teach it. And so
not yet, maybe.
I'm hoping. I keep railing for that too, and just they should, and that's a whole other hot take.
Yeah, I think there is it's in Stanford. I think there is an educational program because one of the guests that I had in the podcast was actually teaching security there. I think it's just very, very rare. So,
but here's the problem, though, right? Stanford is kind of at the top of the food chain, on the top of the ecosystem. We teach computer science classes all across the world in Java or Python, but we don't spend any time. We show people how to build web applications. They never talk about SQL injection. They never talk about input validation and output encoding and authentication, how you do authentication correctly, how you do authorization. Like, we could solve this if we started teaching in computer science classes application security now. 20 years from now, we would see this ripple of attention and understanding for security, and it would get better. 5 years from now, it would get better. And every year we would see things getting better and better and better because people have the foundational knowledge. That's what I've always found is missing, is the foundational knowledge is just not there because no one's ever taught these folks why they need to care about security and privacy.
And I think it comes from a lot as well because the computer science also, a lot of people who get into computer science are not specifically from the university, but kind of in the reconversion path, at least at least I see it a lot, in Europe, that people who worked, let's say, in marketing, who worked in data, who worked, so many different professions, and then actually gradually switched to like software engineering because it interested them or because it got popular. And then you have a program basically, but in 4 months you're like a software engineer, and I'm sure like security is not one of the system systems.
I've talked to some of those folks too, the boot camps, just to make the same point. Like if I was starting a boot camp right now, I would teach people about half of the time AppSec, and the other half of the time I would teach them how to develop, but I would have AppSec interwoven into the boot camp. Think about how far those developers would go once they get into companies and they understand security, they understand input validation, output encoding, sanitization, all of these things. They would rise to the top of every company because they'd be the ones like, why are these folks generating the smallest number of security bugs? Like people would start to see in the metrics that and companies do that now. They look at metrics on a developer by developer basis, a team by team, business unit by business unit. People look at bug count totals and metrics and things, as they should. But my hypothesis is you would start to see those people trained in those boot camps that had a security focus and a development focus, they would rise to the top as far as least number of security and privacy bugs that they would introduce.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it takes time and it takes personal change and organizational change as well, because I think the culture is so tough to change there.
It's changing.
But maybe, it's changing.
It is. It's moving.
Not everywhere. Not everywhere.
I mean, like I said, I've been around for 26 years. I remember the days when people would just look at us and go, no, we're not doing that. Go away. Go away. We're not helping. We're not doing that. That's ridiculous. Like I remember those days where we had to argue and fight and go to the highest levels of management and try to convince them that we had to do these things. And so we're in a totally different space now because all the data breaches of the 90s, 2000s caused enough damage that we got to the point where boards of directors have to sign off on security statements and things now. And so we're in a better place now. Like I've watched it become a better place. Yes, there's probably still places that are difficult, but I don't see anywhere near the pushback that we used to get in the early days where people were they could get away with saying no to us. No, we're not doing that. Whereas now if I go to a development team in a big company and I say, you've got a major security SQL injection vulnerability in your product that you need to fix. If they go, no, they won't be there very long. They'll be fired. If you just told the security team, we're not dealing with that SQL injection, that's not our problem, that leadership team would be gone pretty fast out the door. So that we've made progress.
Okay, and if it's still not the case, in a company, how would you justify, to someone under, let's say, board or like C-level if they don't have maybe, CISO yet? Because there are some companies that do not have, they have security engineer, but they don't have a CISO. Like, so how would you justify, let's say, testing, before releasing in prod? I
mean, I think for me, it's always, let's go back to the customer. What does the customer want these days? And if you go ask 5 customers, how important is security and privacy to you? Everybody's going to say it's top of mind. It's the most important thing. And so if I have an executive and they're somehow trying to tell me that, well, security is not important for what we do. Okay, great. Let's go meet with a couple customers and just listen. I don't need you to say anything. Just listen to what the customers are going to tell us here. And then we get on the phone and just ask those customers, is security and privacy something in our platform that's important to you? Like, how important is it? How do we stack up against our peers? We just rapid fire, ask them a bunch of questions. And that person, after those 5 phone calls still say security and privacy is not important, then they need to go. I don't have the ability probably in this scenario but I would be then asking hard questions of whoever they report to. Like if they report to the board, because boards of directors are all about risk. It's about risk management for them. That's all they care about. They don't care about technical security solutions, not at all. They care about what's the risk to the business, what's the impact, what's the likelihood, what's the ultimate cost? If the thing you described here all happened, how much would it cost us, right? And so if you had a CEO who was like pushing back against security and privacy, and they listened to the customers and they still had that opinion, I'd probably find a new place to work. But the board of directors would be the place to go, do you understand what the CEO is, the risk that the CEO, like, it's a risky move because I'm either going to get fired or the CEO is going to get fired. But at that point, I don't want to work there. If they're going to tell me security and privacy doesn't matter, they don't need me. I might as well go somewhere else, right?
I mean, you can never then justify, your initiatives because they change all photos are not there.
Yeah.
And
there's too many companies. There's too many companies where they understand security and privacy, and they'll give you I'm watching a lot of my friends go into companies that have never had AppSec teams before, and they're building AppSec programs. Like I call it's a greenfield experience. They're going in, they're able to build the program from scratch. They're able to choose the vendors, the tooling solutions, have engineers that are helping. They're able to put all the pieces together. It's because that company realizes the value of AppSec and ProdSec, but maybe they haven't invested in it, but now they're like, we got to invest in this. And so in those scenarios, those folks are coming in, they have the permission, they have the budget, they have the job role to lead a team to do these things. So they're not struggling with somebody telling them they can't do it. If anything, those people said, we have to hire someone to do this now. And so it's just a different world now.
I mean, that's great. And it's, I think, because also the whole industry, I guess, kind of evangelizes, the security. And I think one of the ways to do it is like through newsletters and podcasts. That's what you do. Like, have you seen, like, first, I guess, what did you personally hope to achieve with those tools? Did you also help to like kind of spread, the security knowledge, or what was the initial goal when you started?
I mean, I'm a teacher at heart, and so it's kind of a funny story, but I taught my first college class when I was 18 years old.
Okay.
So, to make a long story short, my mom was she's now retired, but she was a community college math teacher. And so I grew up, every time school was out, I was in the college. It was a community college, but great place. And so every computer science and math was one department. They had about 20 teachers. They all knew me from the time I was a little kid, because on days when school was closed, I was at the college running around. In those days, you could just run around the college as a kid and do your own. You could go to, you didn't have to be watched all the time. And so I ended up getting a job there. It was part of the early IT team. And the guy who ran the computer science department came up to me. He's like, I'm really short. I need somebody to teach an intro to computers class. Would you do it? And I'm like, sure, I'll do it. No problem. But here I am. There are people in the class in their 30s because it's community college. It's not all kids, right? Like it's a mixture of adults, like you said, changing careers and stuff. Even in those days, it was happening. And so here I am. I'm 18 years old. And I'm teaching this class. I'm giving tests and everything. But I love to teach. Like, all of that to say, I do what I do because I want to help people learn. I want to help spread knowledge and educate people across all of our communities. I started the Application Security Podcast because I wanted to be able to ask people questions like you're doing now. I wanted to be able to learn more myself personally, to better my knowledge and understanding, but also with the side goal of saying, let's let that, let's let the community benefit from that as well. And so you mentioned the threat modeling podcast. I'm doing that. I'm talking to various experts in threat modeling and then spinning those into narrative stories to help people in very short doses understand something crucial about threat modeling. And then I also do the security table with my friends Izar Tarandash and Matt Coles, where we just kind of, it's like there's a camera and we're just hanging out somewhere, and you're getting a feed of us just talking about things in security and just having fun with it. And one of my favorite episodes we did, Izar played the sociopathic security person.
Okay.
And I played the vice president of engineering, and Matt played the product manager. And we went through a number of scenarios where we just like, and Izar was on purpose the sociopathic security person, so he could way overplay the role of what security always tells people. And so Matt and I are trying to convince him based on logical arguments about why you need to balance what product needs to do, what engineering needs to do. Like, you can't just do all the security stuff. And so it was, but that's the type of stuff we do there. And then I also do a newsletter called Reasonable Application Security. That the name for that came as an offshoot of a conversation on Security Table, because we started talking about what is reasonable with AppSec. Because for so many years we're always like, and I'm guilty of this. We would be like, I would come say, like, you're the director of engineering. I would just come to a meeting with you and say, well, you need to do all these things because I'm from security. You know, see my badge? I'm from security. And what we realized is, for a long time in security, we've been unreasonable. We've just said, you have to do these things. You have to do all of them. And so it's kind of that key. I'm trying to unpack, how can we be more reasonable with AppSec? But in that newsletter, I give you 5 articles that caught my attention over the last week. I do a summary, but I also give a little bit of commentary on them, a little bit of snarkiness sometimes, because that's just me in general. So yeah, but yeah, all of those things are there because I want to help educate. I want to help the community learn more. I want to expose people to other voices and other people that have experience. And then for me, it's just really enjoyable to ask people lots of questions. And like, if you listen to an episode of AppSec podcast, like, a lot of times the questions I'm asking people are not on the script. I'm listening and I'm like, ooh, that's interesting. Tell me more about that. Like you're doing here. Tell me more about that. Ooh, what does that mean? Oh, how does that fit with this? Like, it's me satisfying my own curiosity, which is a lot of fun to do as well.
I mean, I think for sure it's just very interesting, to ask people like who have very specific knowledge on a particular topic, and they just attack their personal stories. And like, for example, like now the stories that you told, I think I'm definitely gonna remember, developer light bulb story. And I think from like threat modeling perspective, I still like to literally every single person I meet, I tell the story of the Derek Fisher told me about. I don't know if you've heard about, like, basically you go to, in the hotel, you have a shampoo dispenser, and what would happen, like, have you ever thought, if someone would eject something in that shampoo dispenser and you would go bald?
Yeah.
And especially coming like from Derek.
From Derek, well, maybe that's what happened to Derek. Maybe that's a real story. Maybe that's actually happened to him. Because he is bald, so yeah. So
it's actually like the stories like that are always like big pleasure, to hear, and they teach you so much, especially for newbies like me, and there is like one question that I always ask the podcast. So for someone who's just starting, what would be like top 3 advice, like pieces of advice that you would give them to actually excel in the long term?
Yeah, I love that you limit me to 3, because this could be a 30-minute answer of things. Yeah, so here's one of the things. So I'm just going to start listing things off. You can tell me when I get to 3, because I do have, but there is a bit of a priority to this list. So one thing is understand how the operating system and the network works. I see a lot of people in security who don't really understand how packets flow across a network. And that is a core fundamental thing. And I came to security as a sysadmin. And that's so I didn't enter security as a developer. But I learned as a sysadmin how to make operating systems work, how to set up various network services, how the network works. How does IP actually work from the time you type an address? I always ask this question in interviews with people. Because can you tell me how, from the time you type in google.com into your browser and hit go, walk me through the steps of what happens before your browser renders that information in the page? That's one of the first things, like that's my first piece of advice for people that are getting started, is learn that level of depth for how the internet works, because it pays off so many times in the future. Because you'll be in a conversation and people start talking about how something actually works. If you don't have that context, you're you don't know. You're like, I don't even understand what they're talking about. So that's one. It would be to understand the operating system and understand the network itself and how the internet works. Second one is you have to know a development language. You have to know how to code in this day and age. Has to be an object-oriented language. So if you want to start with one, Python's a great one to start with because it's so open. It has so much written about it. I'm a big fan of Codecademy as an interactive tool in the browser. You don't have to pay for it if you don't want to. I don't have any connection to them, but I've used that to do some work trying to learn more about how Go works and Rust and even Python. I've used Codecademy to help me do that. But you have to have that at least knowledge of one object-oriented language, because the great thing is that transfers to everything else. If you understand Python object orientation and how to code in Python, and someone shows you a JavaScript example, you can interpret the JavaScript example against what you know about Python across all the different ways. So that's two. The third thing I would say is connect with your local meetup scene. Every city, almost every city around the world has a technology-focused meetup scene, a security-focused. Like I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we have probably, which is not a big city, we're like 1 million people in Raleigh, or in our county, I think is 1 million people. The city is even smaller. We have probably 5 or 6 very active meetup groups. We have OWASP, 5 to 6 in our small community. We have OWASP, we have ISSA, we have ISACA, we have, there's a couple, we have a DEF CON 919, which is a DEF CON group. We have a security meet with a beer. We have a beer and security meetup where people get together and have a beer and just discuss. So I would say as a new person though, get yourself involved in those things. Like, how do you get a job in security? You get to know people in security and they'll help you find, if you try to submit a job, you're just going against a system against 500 other people that submitted. If you have a friend or somebody that you've met in the meetup scene. So it's about networking. So don't go to those meetups and just sit off to the side. Get involved, sit down with people, talk to people. Like people might be shocked, but I'm not a total extrovert by nature.
Yeah,
I have to, in certain situations, I have to push myself to say, I'm not going to just sit off to the side. I'm going to go and sit down next to somebody and introduce myself and say, how you doing? And now I've reached a point in my career where like, I do that more. I look for those opportunities just to because I don't want people to be sitting there by themselves or off to the side. I try to bring people into the conversation, but so I mean, learn the operating system and network, learn a coding language, and get to the local meetup scene. Get involved in our community, because that's how you make connections. And I'll be at RSA here in a couple of weeks, and I run into people in the hallway at RSA that I met 20 years ago. I worked with 20 years ago. Because I have I've built a community over time. And so going to something like RSA is like connecting with a bunch of old friends. Yeah, there's a conference going on, but that's really one of my primary things is I want to see my old friends. I want to talk to people, see how they're doing, connect, learn from them based on what they're doing, see if there's a way we can do business together, things like that. Like it's part of the network. It's part of being part of the community is really.
I would love to have that feeling one time that I go to RSA. It's going to be my first time this year. So I think, I'm going to have that specific feeling. Still a lot to build, but I'll be, both B-sides actually, and RSA. I think my preference is probably for B-sides, which is smaller and the more application security oriented. So I can't wait to see that. And the last question also that I always ask, is there a book recommendation that like one book?
I read a lot. I tell you one that I've really loved recently. It's called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. It's I think it came out maybe 6 months ago, or it's a relatively new book, but it's this idea, and it has nothing to do with technology, nothing to do with security. I don't read very many technology or security books anymore. I just don't find them very intriguing. It's not that but Slow Productivity, talking about how it's like a system for how you can reapproach work so that you're not always feeling like you're being buried and it's how do you find the right rhythm so that you can do things that make you successful in your job without feeling like you have to work 100 hours a week or 14 hours a day and be on your computer all night long. So Slow Productivity by Cal Newport is one that I love right now, and I'm recommending that a lot to people.
Yeah, I haven't read it, but I'll look it up because I also love to read. It's usually a combination of same like self-improvement or storytelling, and I just start to read certain security books as well, just to better understand the market, better about it. I will not read probably about the new networks in depth personally, but yeah, that would be great. That's actually the first time I think someone mentioned the networks is top one things to learn, and I think development part and community part is something that comes like across almost every time. But the networks is actually interesting perspective to hear. So, well, I think we're approaching like towards the end. We talked almost for like 1 hour. So thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the podcast. I really enjoyed the conversation, and I think I learned a lot. And yeah, thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.